And we're back to the heat seat. I know it's been a little while, but I'm happy to finally be back in here, especially with my very special guest, my grandpa. And what better way to spend Father's Day to do a podcast with Grandpa? So, how are you doing?
Okay.
Doing all
It
right?
isn't often you get to interview a living antiquity, so
Come on, you're not that old. I don't know about antiquity, but maybe a thesaurus, because you got so many things in your mind. You know so many different avenues of thought.
yeah, memories. You get a lot of them when you get into your 90s, you know? So
Yeah, you accumulate a lot. How do you keep track of all of them?
I don't.
They just kind of
They
come.
pop up randomly,
Yep.
you know? Born in Brooklyn and spent most of my uh, younger years there. Uh, and as you said, it was very different living. I came up my younger years during the Depression,
Hmm.
and
Well, let's give a time frame. What year were you born?
where
What year?
1926.
Oh wow. Okay. So yeah, you
Oh
were.
wow, right?
Yeah. So 4 year. What was it? 1929 was the start. That
Yeah,
was Black
29,
Tuesday.
30 actually. Yeah,
Wow.
29 was the crash,
Yeah.
um, and we moved actually from Brooklyn in the very early 30, I guess 1930 or something like that. Uh, my grandparents, my father's parents, bought a house in Hollis,
Hmm.
and we were living together, and we went out, and so we were there for a number of years, and it was tough. My grandfather um, was a very talented uh, uh, window dresser, who did fixed up displays in the
Oh, okay.
windows,
Yeah.
and he was connected with a, a nice department store called Wertheimer's. Uh, I think they were in Manhattan somewhere. Anyway, uh, but then I guess things got bad with the depression, and he lost the job there. And my grandmother had been a hairdresser for, I guess, on and off for years.
Hmm.
And
That's
she,
where mom gets it from.
my,
That's where mom gets it from. Her hairdressing.
I guess so. Yeah, and my father too,
Oh yeah, that's right.
eventually. But and she eventually had to open a salon in the house, at the front of the house.
Wow.
And also around that time, my father got a job in Philadelphia. He opened a sales office for a men's hair treatment, Fitch's shampoo, I guess it was. Yeah,
Mm.
and so we moved to Philadelphia, and we lived there for a while on Parkside Avenue, right across from Fairmount Park. It's a beautiful park in well known in Philly,
Hmm.
and that's when I first started Hebrew school, and I was in elementary school there, and the trolley car. They had trolley cars in
Oh yeah,
those
yeah, that's
days,
right.
in the
Yeah.
early 30s,
Yep.
and right in front of the house, we could take it and go into downtown Philly, because this was kind of a suburb
Hmm.
of Philly where we lived, and go to the movies down there and so on and so forth. And to where I first started to eat pretzels, hot pretzels.
Oh, hot pretzels.
Yeah.
They didn't have them in the city.
Huh?
They didn't have them in the city.
No, they had. The guy came around with a push cart.
Yeah.
When we were at school, and at lunchtime, we could go and get a pretzel. I don't know, they were a couple of cents in
Mhm.
those days,
Yeah.
with mustard.
See, I don't know. You like the mustard on pretzels?
Yeah, on the
I don't like that.
the bulky pretzels.
Yeah.
Uh,
I'm good with just salt on it. Salt, no mustard.
yeah, sure. You don't know what you're missing.
I guess not. I
And
gotta try it.
anyway, so we were there, and then things got bad, and the job petered out for a number of reasons, uh, and we went back. We moved back to Brooklyn, and my early years were pillar to post. My father had problems and couldn't keep a job for reasons, and so I wound up living with my grandparents. My father's well, by this time they had sold the house. They lost the house in Hollis,
Mm.
and again, because it was during the Depression, the only thing that they came up with, I guess, to make a living, my grandfather became the superintendent of an apartment house on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, Crown Heights, and I moved in with them, and because my parents couldn't afford a big enough apartment, and a lot of it is not too clear.
Mm-hmm.
But
There's a lot of things going on at that time.
as far as where they were concerned, and they had a one-bedroom apartment. You know, he was the superintendent, and I slept on a cot in the living room, like an army cot,
Mm-hmm.
with some thick blanket under it for a mattress. And I went to school across the street from actually the PS 167 on Eastern Parkway, and that's where I spent the last part of my elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
Was there, and while I was living there, through school I became acquainted with a guy who became my lifelong friend. I guess it was from the 6th grade or something like that. Milton Beam,
Shout out
actually,
Milton.
whose uncle was the mayor of New York City.
Oh, really?
Abe Beam was his uncle, but in those days it wasn't. He wasn't. He was just his uncle. Anyway, we became friends and stayed friends up until his death a few years ago. He moved to Florida. He got married, and his wife didn't get along with his mother, and he couldn't take it. So, and he became an accountant, and he moved to Florida, and he lived there for the rest of his life.
Mm-hmm.
But we stayed in touch over the years, and when we got together once in a while, we went down to visit a few times, and later on, he came up almost every year, and we got together for dinner when he was up here. Anyway, as a matter of fact, he put together a 72nd anniversary of our elementary school graduation, which was 1941. So in 2013, he put ads in the Florida paper and in the New York paper.
Like looking
If
for
you
footage.
graduated from PS 167 in 1941, and we wound up having about 6 or 7 people. We got together up here, and we had a dinner together out in Queens at
Wow.
the River Cafe, or
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome.
so we had a 72nd anniversary
Not many
of
times you hear about a 70-second.
1941. We graduated. I still have the class picture on my wall in my bedroom of our graduating class.
That's crazy.
1941. And so, anyway, my misspent youth, and that's when I joined the Boy Scouts.
Yes.
We had a Boy Scout troop in the public school, in the elementary school, and we met every month, I think it was. I still have.
Oh yeah, you still have
I still
yeah,
have
show the
my
people,
My Boy Scout registration card.
still registered, everybody. So
Yeah, from. And
that's awesome. Can I see that again?
and then
Can I see that?
yeah, sure.
Wow, look at this. Be prepared.
Yes, yeah. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep morally straight, mentally awake, and something I can't remember
Wow, you
the
got
whole oath.
mostly all of it. That's crazy.
A Scout
So
is
this is-
trustworthy, loyal, friendly.
Yep, that was number one.
Yeah.
Um,
Courteous, kind, obedient.
cheerful,
Cheerful.
thrifty, brave. So this is November 30th, 1945.
Yeah.
That's
And
crazy.
speaking of those years, I still have some ration books from World War II. Do I show it over there?
You can just show it up like this. If anything, I might just take pictures of this after and kind of just put it up on the screen as we talk about it.
Oh, okay.
So that might be easier for people to see.
All right. Anyway, I still have some ration books from my mother, father, and myself
That's
from
crazy.
World War II. You'll remember World War II. It was in all the papers.
All the important ones.
Yeah.
So these ration books, can you give people like a little explanation why they did these? For
Everybody got a ration book because certain foods were rationed.
Mhm.
Butter, coffee, meat, milk. Veggies weren't there, but those kind of things were rationed. And when you ran out of stamps, you couldn't get any more.
Wow.
Uh,
So you kind of had to live on the edge a little bit and kind of, just give one at a time.
right? Yeah, yeah. You handed in the coupon,
Hmm.
for whatever food you needed, and a lot of times they didn't. The meat, it just wasn't available,
Yep.
or like rubber, you couldn't. The rubber tires were
Oh yeah, that's
a
all.
premium. Everything was used, for the armed forces.
Mhm.
Even certain colors, green, they used.
Oh, 'cause all the
For
uniforms.
khaki.
Yeah.
And I remember it was Lucky Strike cigarettes. They had their tradition was a green pack with a red bullseye, if I remember.
Mhm.
And during the war, they had to give up the green, and their slogan was "Lucky Strike, green goes to war."
Oh, okay,
And
yeah.
it turned out the package was white after that with the red bullseye.
That's pretty good marketing.
Yeah.
That's pretty good marketing.
Yeah. So that was those days was touch and go for for food and things like that. And after that period, after we went to live in a couple of other places, which right now are vague in my memory,
That's all right.
but it was still in Brooklyn, and I went to high school. I made a big mistake. In those days, they came around to the elementary schools, some of the schools, and made pictures for you to go to their high school.
Mhm.
And given our economic situation, the vocational high school came around and made a pitch. Go to vocational high school. You could learn aviation mechanics, auto mechanics, boat building, things like that. And so I went to a vocational high school instead of an academic high school. And in those days, vocational high schools were different than they were today.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't have the extensive academic studies that they have now. And so, although they had English and social studies and things like that, they didn't go heavily into math or whatever. Anyway,
So it was more hands-on trading, not really.
yeah, you worked on airplane engines. They
Yeah.
had airplane engines there. They had automobile engines. They had a print shop.
Like print T-shirts?
Huh?
Printing T-shirts?
No. What do you mean?
You said a print shop. Or like newspaper
Oh,
printing?
no. In those days, they had type. You had a
Oh, wow.
printing was done. The typesetters to print a page in a newspaper. They had a big board and with the type with the letter on it in cubicles.
Oh, wow.
And you put them. If you wanted to print a word, you picked out each letter and put it together in a.
Oh, and then you press the thing down and then.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
it went into the press.
Yep.
So that was another, and so you got a taste of different vocations,
Mm-hmm.
and
Didn't like any?
it just, I did it because I felt it would be a quicker way to be able to make money, to earn a living,
Mm-hmm.
if I had that kind of training. It was a big mistake, and I was a terrible hooky player in my later years in high school. In the middle of all that, though, music was always a big part of my life. I can remember my first experience when we were in Hollis. We had a what called a Victrola. It was, it played 78s and you cranked it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the first music made an impression on me was a record by Paul Whiteman, especially a song called When Day Is Done. I remember that. And I could always sing. Later on, my Uncle Freddie took me into where he worked. He worked in a shoe store or something. He stood me on the counter, and I sang a couple of, I was maybe 8 or 9. But for some reason, music just clicked in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got older, I guess even before I was a teenager, before I graduated from elementary school, I loved jazz. Certain artists, a guy by the name of Fats Waller, who was a great pianist and had a group, a big selling artist, very popular. And I loved his music and the way he sang with a sense of humor, and was a great pianist. And I remember when he died I guess it was in the late 40s, something like that. I was very affected by his death. He died on a train. He was going to a date,
Mm-hmm.
doing a job.
Yeah.
And he got a heart attack or something on the train. And it always affected me.
It's weird how that happens. Like
When I heard about his death,
Yeah. Like
because I enjoyed his music so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a big collection of his music, his records, on LPs and on CDs. Anyway, so for some reason I got into jazz. As I got older, I got into it more and more, and I started collecting records. And in those days, it was 78s. It was a 10-inch shellac
Mm-hmm.
record with one song on each side.
Oh wow.
And they lasted, 3.5 minutes was the limit. In the time. If they had a longer composition, they made it in two parts, one on one side, one on the other.
Yep.
Classical music, they put on a 12-inch, some of it on 12-inch 78 RPM, because the compositions were longer.
Yeah. And they could just fit more on that.
Yeah, and if a symphony, for instance, they would put on 3 or 4 records and put them into an album.
Yep.
It'd
be like a binder, right?
A bound cardboard thing with a picture on it or whatever, information on the cover, and then there were leaves inside that you attached. Anyway, that's in high school. I used to play hooky terribly. I was awful. And I would go into Manhattan. The subway was a nickel, And
Did you have to have an MTA card? No, just flip them a nickel, and that's it?
Yeah, just stick a nickel in the slot. A bus ride was a nickel.
That's crazy.
And I used to get money from my grandmother for lunch or something like that. And sometimes I would not spend it, and I would save it up. And I would play hooky and go into Manhattan. Now, in those days, they had stage shows, or in a lot of the Broadway theaters, the program was a movie, a first-run movie, and they had a stage show. Usually it was a big band and 3 or 4 acts with the movie, in addition to a newsreel and a cartoon.
Oh, God.
And so on.
So it's basically like television.
Yeah, but also 42nd Street was loaded with just theaters that had movies, and it was a double bill, 2 movies, and it was 10 cents or a nickel or 10 cents for to get in.
Everything was a nickel.
Something, 10 cents. And so I could sit all day in the movie, There was one that was called a laugh movie. All they played was comedies. Their whole program of movies was comedies.
Yeah.
And so that, and for a quarter you could get into one of the ones with a stage show if you got there before 10 o'clock in the morning. And so you would have the movie, and then the big band would come on. Or anyway, I got to hear a lot of bands.
Yeah, for sure.
And I finally quit before I graduated high school. Another big mistake, because I just couldn't relate to what I was learning.
Yeah. Well, it's not for everybody.
So I quit. I did, odd and end jobs. Some I went to someplace that was rebuilding automobile engines, and I worked on, I don't know, I forget what kind of machinery, a drill with but I knocked around. I finally decided, and again, music was in my mind. And, it was on the radio all the time.
Yep.
The bands were on the radio all the time. The local disc jockeys, that's all they played, was
couldn't escape
big bands. Benny Goodman, Woody Herman, Artie Shaw, Glenn Miller, all of those big bands. And so I wanted to work in a record store. And
it's a good place to start.
So I went into and there were quite a few of them
Mm-hmm.
in Manhattan. And even locally, you could buy records in a store that sold radios, and they had a record department, and they had the 78s there. Anyway, but so I applied for a couple of places that I knew that, especially ones that zeroed in on jazz. By this time, I was into Count Basie and Duke Ellington and more of the swing bands. Than there were two different styles, really. There were the swing bands, Goodman, Shaw, Tommy Dorsey to a certain extent, and sweet bands like Guy Lombardo and people like that, which I hated because they were syrupy, and the sound didn't appeal to me.
Like, what was the difference, like, musically? Was, I guess, the swing bands more upbeat and more sharp with their music, or the other ones were just...
Well, they were, the swing bands like Basie and Benny Goodman. I mean, they played ballads, but they played them in a different style, more rhythmically, and they had, each one had vocalists with them. They usually had a male and a female, a boy and a girl singer, which is where Sinatra got his start with Tommy Dorsey. Actually, he started with Harry James first in late 30s, 1939 or something. And as a matter of fact, he performed here in New Jersey, a place called the Log Cabin, I think. It was on 9W, right off the bridge, off the George Washington Bridge.
It's right in Fort Lee, right by you.
Right near where I live now, right. And but in those days, they had, the radio stations had what they called remotes, and they broadcast from the club. So when Sinatra was out there and he was with, I don't know, with somebody, and Harry James heard him on this broadcast, and he had a big band, and he heard Sinatra, and he came out to hear him, and he hired him, and he lasted with Harry James maybe 2 years. And Dorsey heard him, Tommy Dorsey, and really liked him, and he appealed to Harry James, and Harry James let him go, and he went to sing with Tommy Dorsey, and that's where he really made a big impression. Singers weren't what, when they started, they weren't what they were later on in the 50s, where each one became an act on their own.
Yeah.
They were part of the band makeup. And in addition to the individual singers, a lot of bands had vocal groups with them. 4 singers, like 2 gals and 2 guys. And most of the time, the individual vocalists were part of the group. But anyway, where was I? Oh, yeah, with the music. So nobody would hire me because I didn't have experience.
Well, how are you going to get experience if you're in high school?
Yeah,
That makes no
because
sense.
in those days, everything was by catalog number. Each record had a number on it, and they had them on a wall numerically. And if you weren't familiar with the numbering system, you couldn't find,
That makes sense, I guess.
So I said, where should I go to? I went to a department store. I went to Gimbel's. Gimbel's was a big department store. They were across the street from Macy's. Yeah. And they had a record department up on the, 4th, 5th floor. And so I got a job there in the record department, and I stayed there for, a while until I learned something. And then I went around to the individual stores that were just records. That's all they sold was records. And I wound up at a place called the Main Stem Records on 53rd Street and Broadway, and it was right next to what is now the CBS Playhouse.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's where like some of the late night shows broadcast from.
Gotcha.
This was before television, incidentally, but they did shows there. Anyway, and so I was working there. I worked days mostly, and that's where I met your Uncle Charlie, Uncle Charlie from Florida.
Yeah.
That's where I met him, because he was working there too, but he worked mostly nights. And
wow, that's crazy.
we got friendly. That's how we got friendly. And while I was there, we were about a block and away from 2 blocks, a block and a half from the Capitol Theater, which was another show place that had movies and stage shows. And so while I was there were studios in the building upstairs, some record studios, and also publishers and vocal teachers. And Tony Bennett came in.
You got a picture with them?
Yeah, if I can find it. Oh, well.
Is it that one? Is it that one
Oh.
right there? You got it?
This was another guy that used to come in. I Love Lucy and Desi. That's
yeah.
Desi Arnaz. Which he autographed for me. Anyway. Where are you? Oh, yeah. There's the guy who used to... His vocal coach was upstairs, Tony Bennett. And while I was there, the stage show at the Capitol Theater, the headliner was Frank Sinatra. And also on the bill, because they usually had, it wasn't Frank Sinatra, they had other acts.
Yeah, they had the...
And the other big act was the Will Mastin Trio. And so anyway, it consisted of Will Mastin and his brother and their nephew, whose name was Sammy Davis Jr. The brother was Sammy Davis, or the uncle. Anyway, so Sammy Davis used to come into the store, and we got acquainted because he liked jazz, and I used to play records for him. He bought some records for me.
And this was before he was big, right? This was just... This was before he was Sammy Davis Jr., right?
78. Yeah, right. He was part of the Will Mastin Trio.
Yeah.
And so one day he said to me, "Do you play Monopoly?" I said, "Yeah, I like it." He says, "We're short of fourth. We played during our break." He says, "You want to come up and fill in?" I said, "Sure." So for a couple of days, I went up to his dressing room at the Capitol and sat in playing Monopoly with him. And anyway, this was Sammy Davis before he was a big star, and he autographed it. And to my pal, always Bob, from your boy, Sammy, and he autographed it, the Will Mastin Trio, and then Sammy Davis Jr.
He's got them both.
And This
crazy.
was obviously before he lost his eye in the accident. But while he was on the bill, while I went out to visit him, Sinatra was the headliner, and I was a big Sinatra fan. And he took me in a couple of times and introduced me, and I got this wonderful picture of Sinatra autographed. So this
Worth
is
$1 million. Oh,
this is mid-40s Sinatra.
wow. So when did he blow up? When did he become famous? Sinatra.
A couple of years before this. I think he left Dorsey around 1943 or 4, something like that, and went out on his own. And he was one of the first band singers who became well known on their own as an individual act. Dick Haymes was another one. Perry Como, who was huge, later on television, had his own show. He was a vocalist with Ted Weems, I think, was the orchestra. But Sinatra, as a matter of fact, Sinatra, I went to see him when he first got started. He opened at the Paramount Theater on 42nd and 43rd and Broadway. Huge, another big movie and stage show place. And he wasn't even the headliner. Benny Goodman was the headliner. Benny Goodman Orchestra and special Frank Sinatra. I had never seen him in person. This was really at the start of his career. The line, now the line went around the block 3 or 4 deep from Broadway all the way down west to 8th Avenue.
Jeez.
Lined up to see that show. I waited online for over an hour, got in. I brought my lunch. They didn't change. I stayed for 2 shows.
They didn't have a concession stand or anything. You gotta bring your own.
There's a story connected with his appearance with Goodman the first time, and I heard it from John Bunch, the pianist I eventually worked with later on. Goodman had never really knew about Sinatra's, all the Bobby Soxers, the young girls that went crazy for him.
What do they call
And
them?
so when the first time they came out, the Goodman was the opening act, and so his part was finished, and he turned around from the audience to face the band, and the announcer made the announcement, "Now, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Sinatra," and the place went crazy. I mean, they used to scream like the Beatles,
Yeah.
They screamed, and Goodman had his back. He didn't know, and
He thought it
he
was
was
for them.
he said, "What the F was that?" Because he had never been exposed to the Sinatra,
craze.
craze before.
Wow. So he was probably jealous.
Huh?
He was probably jealous, right?
No. I mean, he just had never heard an explosion
Oh, okay. Yeah.
of screams and cheers like that before. Even for him, he was very popular, but he never had anything like that.
Yeah.
So,
Wow, that's pretty crazy. He's almost Beatle-like.
huh?
He's like the Beatles.
Yeah, I mean,
For that time, yeah.
Yeah, with the kids, but this is, and so anyway, that was my introduction, to music, and I stayed in the record business. I went from there to a variety of different jobs in the record business. I worked for a distributor and so on. Sold. We had a territory. The MGM had a record label, MGM Records, and I used to cover the Bronx and Harlem, and for them, and eventually I worked around and I got a job with Corvettes. And Corvettes was a big department type store like Caldor's. Caldor's was the follow up to Corvettes, but there was two guys. There were a number of stores, but Corvettes was really the one that spread out, and they had a record department. But they sold clothing and small appliances, toasters and irons and things like that, and books. And one of the few that had a book and record department. And I started in the store on time in 48th Street, right up in Rockefeller Center. There was a store and a record department in the store. And then I went up to Scarsdale. We had a store up there. When I started there were 8 stores. They were out in Long Island, in Roosevelt Field, and Carl Place, actually. It was this, and we grew and became more popular. We were the first, really, to bring records and books to the suburbs in any kind of display, not as an afterthought, but as a separate department that featured out. By this time now, LPs had come into being, and 45s, and so I eventually I was brought into the office as an assistant buyer. Our office was down on 45th or 44th, between Park and Lexington, the buying offices. And there was a store, a drug, they had a pharmacy also, another one for the first. And eventually I became the buyer. I was promoted. And by this time, we had opened a store on 5th Avenue and 47th Street. We had 5 floors.
Wow.
And
so you guys were like really, really popular.
Oh yeah, they were big.
Talk of the town.
I remember they took the building over. They put in an escalator. There was no escalator in the building that they took over.
And they put one in there.
Whatever was in there before. And so we were on the, they had a balcony area. And that's where the records and books were, between the first and the second floor. And we did a huge business there. And we were the first to start having personal appearances of artists who had albums coming out, LPs.
Yep.
And part of my responsibility was to handle the appearances. And so I got a chance, to meet some interesting people and work with them. This is a man who was a huge star, international, Maurice Chevalier. He was in Gigi. He was a world-renowned singer, entertainer, and he had an album coming out, and we got him for a personal appearance. So that was it. And these are autographed.
All autographed, by the way. Just letting people know, it's all autographed, by the way.
Yeah.
So how do you get to choose, how do you get to choose who comes
Well,
Like,
we worked with the promotion people for the
okay.
record labels,
Gotcha.
for Columbia Records or RCA Records. In those days, there weren't all of these individual.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, everybody didn't have their own label.
Yep.
You signed with a label, and they had producers and who produced the albums
Yep.
and worked with the artists, and A&R people who helped choose the repertoire that they recorded, and so.
So you were in contact with.
And
the record
because
label.
we became a heavyweight in the record business. They wanted to make especially on Fifth Avenue and
Yeah,
47th
yeah.
Street. You know, we had
Prime
huge,
time.
yeah, prime area, right.
Yeah.
And so we got a lot of people. In the early 60s, there was a big craze of Bossa Nova. The big record was The Girl from Ipanema. And here's the guy who made it popular, was Stan Getz, who was a great tenor sax player. He came up with Woody Herman's band and became a star on his own right. And so we got him for an appearance. And two of my favorite musicians, Mel Torme, a great singer, and Woody Herman, a band leader. And here's yours truly with a beard.
With the beard. I
with
love it. This
Torme
is the first time I've ever seen him with a beard, and I am speechless.
and the last time.
And the last time.
and a big show called Mame on Broadway, starring Angela Lansbury, who had a big called Murder, She Wrote on television for years. She was the star. And we had her for an appearance, and that's me without the beard.
Short-lived.
Autographs, yeah.
And Mom said that she also did the Teapot song in.
Yeah, she was right in Beauty and the
Beauty and
Beast.
the Beast, there we
Yes,
go.
the
Yep.
Disney, right.
Yeah, so she sang the
And
Teapot song.
another big popular singer, Bobby Darin, who had a big records. He came for an appearance for an
studs.
album, and Judy Collins, who was part of Woodstock, and from The Wizard of Oz, one of the most popular movies ever made.
I would say so.
The score for that, Over the Rainbow, this is the man who wrote it, Harold Arlen, and we had him for an appearance. He was the album. He was a very good singer, and a pianist too, and he wrote so many hit songs. I mean, his catalog is Judy Garland, Star Is Born, that she did the musical of the movie.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The Man That Got Away, Harold Arlen wrote that score for that for that movie. Ira Gershwin wrote the lyrics. George and Ira Gershwin. You don't know George Gershwin. Rhapsody in Blue.
Sounds familiar, but
Oh.
doesn't ring a bell.
Oh.
So when they came
You know, that's part of what I feel so deeply about, that people have missed, is there was so much good music that was written from, I guess, from the 1920s. I'm talking about, through the 50s. These people wrote hundreds of wonderful songs with wonderful, poetic, meaningful. A lot of it was throwaway stuff. Yeah, it was silly, and meaning, not that much meaning, but so much of it. The Gershwins, Harold Arlen, Cole Porter. You can go through a list of composers and lyricists. Ira Gershwin. They were the guys who wrote lyrics. Wrote some of them were beautiful poetry. They were,
Yeah.
and the music had had it was it could you could have a love song and not have it syrupy, you know, but yet you could convey the feeling of what it meant to be in love through music and through lyrics. And you don't have that. There's no subtlety left. There's not much wit. A lot of them had witty things to say in the lyrics. And it had a beginning and a middle and an end.
It was well put together. It was all there.
Yeah, and it told a story.
Yeah.
You could tell a story, you know. A song like Sinatra did called Everything Happens to Me, you know. I make a date for lunch, you can bet your life it rains. I try to give a party and the guy upstairs complains. I guess I'll go through life catching colds and missing trains. Everything happens to me, you know. Things like that. They tell a story.
Yeah.
Gershwin wrote, but not for me, you know. They're writing songs of love, but not for me. A lucky star above, but not for me. With love to lead the way, I found more clouds of gray than any Russian play could guarantee. I was a fool to fall and get this way. Hi-ho, alas, and also lack-a-day. Although I can't dismiss the memory of her kiss, I guess she's not for me. Then he wrote a second refrain. It all began so well, but what an end. This is the time a fella needs a friend, when every happy plot ends in a marriage knot. But there's no knot for me. I mean, how could you say it better?
I don't know.
What he was missing out on.
I feel like nowadays, like, they just, like you said, like, it's put together. It's well thought out. It's all there. And nowadays, it's just like, what will sell the most? What will, you know, get me the most hits? What will make me the most money?
Yeah. I mean, Gershwin wrote Rhapsody in Blue, Porgy and Bess. He wrote an opera. One of the only jazz opera that I know of, American jazz opera. And he was heavily influenced by jazz. Harold Arlen also was influenced by jazz, by blues. So many of his songs have the blues feeling that he got. He was a cantor's son, incidentally.
Oh, really?
From Buffalo, New York.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fellow Jew.
So, anyway, that's how I got into. Then I met up with some people when I was at RCA. Bill Simon, who was he put together a lot of multi-record albums for the Reader's Digest. They had a series of albums you could buy, concept albums, and he produced them. So he knew a lot of musicians. And George Simon, who was one of the brothers of Simon and Schuster. Carly Simon was his niece. You don't know Carly Simon. Oh, my God. Anyway,
I'm sorry.
she was popular. Anyway, George played drums, and Bill played alto sax. And they got together with some other... they did other things, but they were good enough to play jazz. They loved jazz. And we got a group together. They got a group together, and I got to know Bill, and he knew I sang, and I used to sit in with them once in a while. They started in a little bar in Manhattan, up on 40 in the 40s someplace. It eventually blossomed. George knew the guys that owned Eddie Condon's, which was the first big jazz club on East 54th Street, West 54th Street. This was after they had moved up from the village. And they were a jazz club. They had jazz groups playing all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Condon originally was a well-known guitarist, jazz guitarist. And he died, and a couple of guys took over the name. Red Balaban, who was a bass player, and I forget who else opened Eddie Condon's. And George made a deal for us to try with our group Wednesday night from 6 to 9.
3 hours.
Yeah.
That's long.
So we had a working quartet, piano, bass, drums, and guitar. And I was the boy vocalist. And we started to play there. And we were there for 5 years until they tore the building down to make room for a new office complex. Mm-hmm. The group of buildings, so we left there, but we were there. And on West 54th Street, right off 7th Avenue, east of 7th Avenue, we would get a lot of musicians in who were working in Broadway shows, and they would come in for a drink before they, you know.
Get a little loose.
If they had their horns, they would sit in with us. So we had a lot of musicians who would come in and sit in, and play with us. And we had some. Our main pianist was a man by the name of John Bunch, who had played with Benny Goodman. When Goodman went to Russia for the State Department in the early 60s, John Bunch was the pianist with Benny Goodman at the time. And anyway, this is the group. There's me and John Bunch. Manny Duran was the trumpet player, and there's and George and Bill. This was eventually we moved from there to a place called Red Blazer 2 on West 46th Street between Broadway and 8th, between 8th and 9th. There was a row of restaurants and clubs, and Red Blazer featured swing and jazz all the time. And so we were there also from 6 to 9. And so this is me with the group.
There he is, front and center.
Yeah.
That's great. I love the sunglasses, too.
When I was singing, yeah. Dan Fox was the guitarist with us. And we did, jazz tunes and show tunes and standards. I have a book with hundreds of song titles and the key that I do them in. And so we did club dates, and because Bill was familiar with the Reader's Digest because he had worked for them, they had anniversary dinners every year at their headquarters in Pleasantville.
Oh, okay.
In Westchester.
Yeah.
And for 3 years we played for them for their 20th anniversary dinner.
Well, we're at the hour mark, so I don't know if you want to cut it here or keep going a little bit.
Yeah. The what?
We're at it's been 1 hour.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Well, if you want to continue a little bit, then we can, but
anyway, that was my avocation. I did that for 10 years, working with some of the best jazz musicians in the country who played with us. Derek Smith, who was the staff pianist for ABC television. Whenever they had a guest on and they needed accompanist, Derek played for them.
Wow.
He worked with us. There were so many. I met the people that I idolized as a kid. I got to know and work with, or even sing with on some occasions. And to hear their stories about when they worked with the bands, I was in heaven. And that, like I said, that was my hobby. What I did for a living, eventually, I wound up after Corvettes. I was there for 9 years, and I went to Wonderland Records, Golden Records. I became the national sales manager. That they had the license for the Golden Books for kids, and we put together a line of Golden Book and Record, a cassette and book together. And so I traveled the country for them. I was there 8 years, 9 years. Anyway, I got a call one day from Bob Pavlaka, who was the sales manager for Disney Records. I knew him because we worked together in one of our
Oddball jobs.
Yeah. Anyway, and he said they had an opening at Disney for an Eastern sales and marketing manager. Would I be interested? So I left. I went out and interviewed. I went out to the studios, and I got interviewed, and I was hired with Disney. And that was wonderful. That was where I eventually retired from. I was with them
A long time.
13, 14 years, something like that. And that was... before I get to that, I wanted to tell you, while our group, one of the people who used to come in to see us all the time was Rachel Robinson, Jackie Robinson's widow.
Oh, wow.
She loved jazz, and she knew George Simon, our collator. They were neighbors in Connecticut. And she ran every summer at their home. She had a jazz fundraiser for the Jackie Robinson Foundation, and she invited us to come up and perform one summer. And so we went up there, and this is the crowd on their back lawn.
That's crazy.
At their home in Connecticut. And there were a lot of jazz people, different groups. We weren't the only ones, obviously. Billy Taylor, who had his trio, he was there. Jerry Mulligan, a world-famous saxophonist, and other people. Joe Williams, who sang with Count Basie, was there. And we had a wonderful afternoon and performed.
That's crazy.
At that fundraiser. Anyway, getting back to Disney, these are the guys the five of us, not him, but we covered the country for Disney Records, the music division. And that was one of these were great people to work for. I'm still in touch with the guy who covered the Midwest, Ron Roberg. We're still friends. We talk every year. We send cards. I'm still in touch with one of my customers from Minneapolis.
Wow, really? That's crazy.
Van Vanyo, his name is. And we talk every year. We I spoke to him, and whenever he came to New York, we would get together and have dinner.
Mm-hmm.
He and his wife Carol.
That's awesome.
I made. That's another thing. I met such interesting people.
Yeah, for sure.
When I was at RCA, I put together. They had a record club, and the RCA Record Club, and you got albums every month.
Mm-hmm.
And Brad Braden, his name was my boss, and Jack Fuller, who worked there, was a wonderful jazz clarinet player, and he used to come and sit in with us too. And but Bernard Braden, his name was. It was so. I learned so much from these people. That was like a college education for me. That because I learned so much, not only about music, but just about literature, about so many. They were so well spoken,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to learn from them better ways to express myself, expand my language, and become a little more world-wise, and I grew intellectually because of my association with these people. I was able to learn from them. I think that's so important as you go through life. If you come in contact with people who are better educated or who know more, you can learn a lot from them if you listen and become a much better person, intellectually, socially, in all aspects. It will help you. It'll help you get along with people better, and I think it helps with family life too.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't know what else I can add, unless you have anything else you want to know.
I mean,
about.
I'm pretty blown away by all these stories and pictures, and I feel like we're at a good point where we could leave it. But yeah, I would love to have you back on here and talk more about, I guess, anything else that I have in mind. But yeah, that was awesome. I love listening to your whole story and all the people that you met and how it changed your life. And I feel
I didn't even get into the last 15 years of my life.
I know, it's crazy.
Which I spent selling fur coats.
Oh yeah, that's right.
At Bloomingdale's. Yes.
I mean, just so everybody knows, they just closed Bloomingdale's fur department.
Well, they just reopened now. They're
reopened?
closing the fur department.
They're closing the fur department. Yeah.
Macy's
is.
and Bloomingdale's. Yeah, there are no more furs.
Yeah.
But there again, on a chance thing, I was retired from Disney, and I was going crazy, and I didn't know, and I answered an ad in the paper for the fur department.
That's all it takes.
I part-time work. I worked because I was retired.
Mm-hmm.
I worked 4 days a week, though. I was a kid of 78 when they hired me.
Did you have any experience?
Finished because of the virus. They closed in March.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I'd probably still be there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I learned a whole new industry.
Yeah.
Learned all about furs and so on. So that was a whole new career for me, and so that brings me up to the present.
But yeah, that's definitely great how you you retired and you thought, what am I gonna do now? And then you find out this whole new department exists and this whole new world of furs and sales. Like it's definitely it got you back on your feet.
And I met some wonderful people. I made some good friends there.
Yeah.
And we're still we speak and often. and I had two great managers, Barbara Williamson, who's Barbara Sauer now because she got married.
Congratulations, Barbara.
And Donna.
Oh yeah, I met Donna a couple times.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, she was nice. Good people.
No. So anyway, a number of lifetimes
Yeah.
in
Seems
one
that way.
lifetime, in different aspects of music and furs.
Yeah. Well, I definitely.
Anyway, thank you for inviting me.
Well, thanks for being here. I mean, I missed you. You know, I haven't seen you in. You know, it's been a couple months. I mean, I came by and I said hello.
Yeah.
And dropped off some stuff, but to actually like sit, talk, and hang out, it's different.
It's much better than Zooming.
Zoom is over. We're doing it in person now. But anyway, I just want to say it's awesome to see how your whole life came together, and I wish my life could be as exciting and as what's the word, introspective as yours.
Well,
And I hope to take some notes to learn.
like I said, I was lucky because and there were so many people that I didn't mention that I learned from.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate in meeting these people, and I guess to my credit, I was smart enough to take advantage of those situations
Mm-hmm.
and realize the value of what these people had to offer.
Yeah.
And if you leave yourself open to these things, you can,
You can learn
who
a lot.
knows where it will lead, you
Yeah.
know.
This one quote that I forget who said it, but they said every time you talk to someone, assume that they have something to tell you that you don't know. So always assume that they have something to tell you that you don't know. So you don't try to cut them off. You don't try to think that you know everything. You got to leave yourself open to other ideas and other ways of thinking.
Listening is very important. I learned that. One more story. I
One
was
more
in
before we go.
Texas. I was still with Golden Records at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't been to this distributor before. And we went out to lunch, and I was there with, I had never met these people. Lubbock, Texas, I think it was. I don't know. And we were at lunch, and I started expounding and, talking on a lot of, I don't know how but anyway, I was kind of dominating the conversation. There were two other guys there.
Mm-hmm.
And the one guy finally, in an empty space in my conversation, he very pleasantly looked over at me and he says, "Excuse me, sir, but you must have me confused with someone who gives a shit." And from that moment
I was
on,
like, oh, all right.
I looked at him and I cracked up, and we both laughed, and we became friends. But
That's awesome.
about being able to listen,
Mm-hmm.
very important.
Yeah, definitely. Well, guys, I want to thank you guys for tuning in.
I'm hungry.
Me too. Let's go eat. All right, guys, this is it. Thank you, Grandpa. Love you. Happy Father's Day.
I love you too.
And see you guys soon. See ya.
Over and out.